What is the evidence for God or for Christ?
No, for Christianity, like the religion.
Well, sir, I don't think you'd be wise to put your faith in Christianity, the religion, because it's been used to justify the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials. Genesis chapter 1 is not seeking to answer the question, how long did God take to create? How did God create? What process did God use to create? It is silent. Genesis does not answer the question, what process did God use to create? What does Genesis 1 answer? It answers the question, who created? It says, in the beginning, God, not in the beginning, hydrogen, which is radically different from the creation account taught by many people here at this fine university. And the second question it answers is, why did God create? What's the purpose of God making us? But in answer to the question, how did God create? What process did God use to create? It's not there.
One of the things that theory of evolution says is that humans came from apes.
Yeah.
And my understanding of what's written in the Bible is that humans were created in the image of God. Does that mean that we were created separately from apes, or is that a contradiction, or just if you could?
Bottom line is, the Bible teaches you're not an ape. You're a human being created in the image of God. Did God use apes to create people? I don't know. But I can promise you, nobody has proven that. It's a theory. It's got a little bit of evidence to support it, but I sure would underline little. I think it's highly questionable. You give me solid evidence for it, and I'll accept it.
So the idea of macroevolution versus microevolution, then?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying?
I think there's a ton of evidence for microevolution, but where's the evidence for macroevolution? This is what helps me understand that. Charles Darwin did a great job breeding pigeons. And Charles Darwin took those gray, ugly birds and breeded them to the point where they had magnificent displays of feathers. And they were gorgeous. Then Darwin extrapolated. And this is where I think he made a big mistake. He extrapolated that if I can breed pigeons and change the way they look in just a few years, just think what could happen over thousands and millions of years. Well, I wish Charles Darwin would have gone to a breeding farm with a farmer who raises cattle, pigs, horses. I don't care how long you have. You're never going to be able to breed a horse coming from a pig, or a cow coming from a mule. Why? Because of the limits in the genetic pool. See, all Darwin did was take animals with the same genetic pool and emphasize certain qualities. But this whole idea that you can take an animal that has a limited genetic pool and breed a pig out of a horse, it's impossible because of the limits of the genetic pool. So that would be an example of a question that I would have for someone who would insist we came from apes who came from fish. Really? Is that really supported by a lot of evidence? I have not seen that evidence yet. But microevolution? Tons of evidence to support microevolution. So obviously microevolution occurs. Macro? Wow. Seems to me there's an agenda behind almost every person I've talked to who insists about macroevolution being true. And that agenda is to justify their atheism. And that's scary, because that's intellectually dishonest. The question is, what does the evidence point to? And if the evidence points to macroevolution being true, great. But if there's no evidence to really support it, I'm not going to believe it just because I want to justify my philosophy.
Isn't the whole idea behind macroevolution that it's a microevolution over thousands and thousands and thousands of years? And with your point with you can't get a cow to come out of a pig, that's because, like, yes, as you said, there's restrictions in the gene pool.
Right.
However, if you look at the gene pool between between Homo sapiens and apes, there are an extremely large amount of similarities, which means microevolution over time turning into macroevolution would lead to us as Homo sapiens.
Okay.
So there's your evidence.
I would insist that's minimal, but if you want to
I
accept that as evidence, fine.
I could do more research tonight if you're coming back tomorrow, and I could have this huge thing for you if you wanted. But I mean, I don't think you should completely throw out the idea of evolution when there is evidence that supports it. Your idea of a pig coming out of a cow or a cow coming out of a pig is completely different than a human and an ape, because we are more similar than a cow is to a pig.
If you listen carefully to what I said, I pointed out that Darwin extrapolated from his experiments with pigeons to macroevolution. My point is, I don't think he had enough evidence to back up that extrapolation.
Darwin in his book never even mentioned the word evolution.
But his whole point is that in the same way that he saw pigeons adapt the way they did, so take thousands of years, and he was convinced that we could adapt in amazing ways. And the question I raised is, Darwin, you saw tremendous adaptation within a particular gene pool. There's no evidence that once you go outside a gene pool that you're going to be able to have an animal cross into another gene pool. I haven't seen any evidence for that.
But they haven't crossed gene pools. We're in the same gene pool. It's just microevolution leading to a macroevolution that has led to the evolution of ape into man. And matter of fact, you can look at man now and see that we're still evolving, except it's now in a technology sense. I mean, evolution is still occurring. How can you deny it altogether?
I didn't.
But you deny,
I said Genesis opens the door, never answers the question, what process did God use to create? I clearly pointed out that many followers of Christ, like Francis Collins, the head of the Human Genome Project, who's a devout follower of Christ, believes in evolution as a process, but not as an origin.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, earlier when you talked about the canonization of the Bible,
Yes?
you mentioned, was it Orthodox? Was one of their
Yes?
What exactly does that word Orthodox mean? Just because I
You
hear
bet.
it a lot, but I don't know what it means.
Holding to the teachings of the apostles, holding to the teachings of the Old Testament. If a book, like the Gospel of Judas, like the Gospel of Thomas, like the Gospel of Pontius Pilate, if a book contradicted the apostles' record of what Jesus taught, if it contradicted the Old Testament, it was viewed as unorthodox out of the group of literature that agreed with the apostles' recollections of what Jesus taught. You see, the Gospel of Judas is a classic example of Gnosticism. Who's the hero in the Gospel of Judas? Judas Iscariot. Well, why is the guy who betrayed Christ the hero? Because the whole point of Gnosticism is you want to be free of your body. Your body is worthless. It drags you down. And so Judas Iscariot is the hero because Judas Iscariot helps Christ get crucified, which means he loses his body and his spirit is free. But you see, sir, that is in diametrical contradiction to what the apostles taught, to what Jesus taught, to what the Old Testament teaches. And that is why the Gospel of Judas was rejected from the New Testament canon.
What is the evidence?
Good question. What is the evidence for God or for Christ?
No, for Christianity, like the religion.
Well, sir, I don't think you'd be wise to put your faith in Christianity, the religion, because it's been used to justify the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials.
That's not what I'm saying. Like, okay, so you have the Bible, and it defines a way of living. Oh,
Jesus made ethical teachings like the Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
Defines ethics, yes, sir.
yes. So like there's a certain way Christians live. Like they have different things that are sin. They have different things that they're called to do. They have like
Yes.
outside of the Bible. How do you get this system? Like, how do you like come to justify this system without using the Bible? So, like, for instance, premarital sex is sin. Now, like, how would you, like, justify that without the Bible?
That if you're going to marry a woman who's had many sex partners, the idea that just because she walks down an aisle out in nature and says she loves you and she's going to be committed to you, the evidence is she loves having sex with many different men. So why would you trust her that she's going to be committed just to you? Therefore, get ready to be burned.
Okay. So is that like...
Whereas, if the woman insisted that sex outside of marriage is wrong, the odds are, when she makes a commitment to you, she's not going to be looking for other men.
Okay.
So I'd say watch out about premarital sex if you're looking forward one day to having a relationship of commitment.
Right.
Now, if you're not looking forward to having a relationship of commitment, if you view sex as an open thing, and you can swap wives, girlfriends, it really doesn't matter, I would say watch out. You're going to be a very lonely, superficial person.
I wasn't like necessarily trying to like justify that. I was more like justifying that it's a sin, or like, why is it wrong in God's eyes?
Well, if something's wrong in God's eyes, God's going to have to reveal that, right? I'm not going to be able to figure that out.
Right.
And what Jesus Christ claimed is that he is God revealing what is good and what is evil.
Very little.
Okay. Now, but wouldn't you have to like say that using the proof that like he said it in the Bible, and that's where like that's what I'm saying is like the Bible says that it's right, and so like you're getting like, but it's circular. Like if something says that it's right, using itself, it's
How
like
are you going to find out about American history without reading an American history book? How are you going to find out about Muhammad without reading the Quran? How are you going to find out about Siddhartha Gautama Buddha without reading the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha? How are you going to find out about any historical person without reading the eyewitness accounts? Do you see what you're asking, sir?
Yeah. Thank you.
It's impossible for me to learn about Abraham Lincoln without reading U.S. history. It's impossible for me to learn about Napoleon without reading European history. And it's impossible for me to find out about Jesus Christ without reading the Gospels, the eyewitness account of how Jesus lived, what he taught, how he died, and how he rose from the dead. Yes, sir.
I'll ask another. One of my classmates, and I really disagreed with him a lot on this, but he said that moral decay and I guess better morality is somehow tied to education. What are your thoughts on that?
You bet. Sounds like a good Westerner. Sounds like a good white Westerner. I can't believe how many people think all religions are equally valid. And I don't have faith. Excuse me? Well, yeah, Cliff, all religions are equally valid. Really? That statement means that either there is no God or God is an impersonal force who doesn't care what you think about him. And that is incredibly Western, white, Enlightenment thinking. It's a faith position. It's a worldview.
He made the claim that education was tied to morality, and I guess in terms that the more educated you are, the more enlightened you are, and you
bet.
somehow.
The more educated you are, the more moral you are.
Yeah.
H.G. Wells believed that. H.G. Wells saw World War I came along. H.G. Wells was convinced that World War I was the war to end all wars. But then H.G. Wells saw World War II come along. And he saw the most highly educated, highly technological nation of the world, Nazi Germany, perform some of the most horrible human atrocities imaginable. And H.G. Wells wrote a book called The Fate of Man. And in this book, H.G. Wells writes, "My faith in man and in education and in technology is bankrupt. For I have witnessed the return of organized torture by Nazi Germany. My faith is bankrupt. I respect him for his honesty. The idea that education is the basis of morality is a farce. For the question is, what are you going to use your good education to do? Blow up people or find a cure for cancer? See, so the question goes deeper. The question goes right back to, is there a God or is there not? If there is no God, morality is relative. So you create it in your intellectual ivory tower, on the streets of the inner city. You create what's right, you create what's wrong, and it's all relative. But if there is a God, and this God is good and just, and if this God gave you and me a conscience, then it means that justice is not a relative value. It's an objective moral value. And guess what? I am so glad that all my atheist friends have consciences that tie them into those moral absolutes. Because could you imagine living in a society filled with people who did not have a conscience? That would be scary.